The emergency department had settled into the quiet rhythm that comes just before dawn. Monitors beeped softly. A janitor pushed a mop through the hallway. Patients slept behind thin curtains. Then every security camera inside the hospital went black. Within seconds, armed men in unmarked tactical gear entered through 3 separate entrances. They ignored the pharmacy, the trauma bays, and the cash office. They moved with one purpose. A woman carrying a cardboard box of personal belongings looked up from the reception corridor. She wore ordinary clothes now. Her hospital badge had already been deactivated. Hours earlier, she had been fired. Nobody paid attention to the former ER nurse standing in the middle of the hallway. The men had crossed half the country to find her. They believed she would run. They had made the first mistake.
At 4:18 in the morning, the emergency department was quieter than it had been all night. The ambulance entrance stood empty for the first time in hours. Nurses finished charting. A respiratory therapist leaned against the medication room door, drinking cold coffee. Somewhere deeper inside the hospital, a floor buffer hummed across polished tiles. It was a kind of silence every emergency worker recognized. It never lasted. Claire Morgan folded her navy blue scrub top with slow, careful movements and placed it inside a cardboard box. A folded family photograph rested on top, followed by a worn trauma handbook with corners softened by years of use. The locker door remained open behind her. No one spoke. People walked past, looked inside for a second, then quietly continued down the hallway. The news had spread quickly. The ER nurse with 14 years of service had been dismissed before the end of her shift. Officially, the reason was insubordination. Earlier that evening, Claire had ignored a direct administrative order to transfer an unstable patient before adequate preparation had been completed. The delay lasted only 6 minutes. The patient survived. Hospital management was less interested in the outcome than in the broken chain of command. Rules, they insisted, existed for everyone. Claire never argued during the meeting. She signed the termination papers without asking for another chance. That calm reaction unsettled the hospital administrator more than anger would have. "You have nothing to say," he had asked. Claire simply replied, "Everything that mattered was already said in the trauma bay." She stood, collected her employee badge, and walked out without looking back. Now the badge lay inside the cardboard box beside her folded uniform. A young nurse stepped into the locker room, hesitated, then approached. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Claire offered a small smile. "Take care of the patients. I wish they hadn't done this. They made the decision they believed was right." The younger nurse frowned. "You don't seem angry." Claire gently closed the box. "Being angry doesn't improve tomorrow." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The younger nurse noticed something she had never paid attention to before. Claire's hands. There were old scars across her knuckles. Thin white lines crossed 2 fingers. A faded burn mark disappeared beneath her wristwatch. They did not resemble ordinary workplace injuries. Before she could ask, Claire picked up the box. "I should go." As she left the locker room, several employees quietly moved aside to let her pass. Not because they feared her, because they did not know what to say. The emergency department had a habit of changing people. Most nurses became louder over the years. Some became harder. Others left. Claire had become quieter. She walked through the familiar corridor one last time. Every supply cabinet was exactly where she remembered. Every emergency exit, every oxygen station, every blind corner, every security camera. Without appearing to look, she noticed one camera above the reception hallway had shifted a few degrees from its normal position. Maintenance, perhaps, or perhaps not. She continued walking. Outside Trauma Room 3, an elderly patient suddenly lost consciousness while waiting for transport. A stretcher rolled sideways as a frightened orderly froze. Before anyone called for help, Claire set her box down. She caught the patient's head before it struck the floor. 2 fingers found a carotid pulse. Weak, irregular. She looked once at the heart monitor, moved the oxygen closer. Nobody questioned her. Raised her shoulders. A nurse obeyed instinctively. "He's aspirating. Turn him now." Within seconds, the airway cleared. The patient's breathing stabilized. Only after the crisis passed did everyone remember. Claire no longer worked there. A physician arrived, examined the patient, then looked toward her. "Thank you." She simply nodded. No speeches. No reminder that she had been fired less than an hour earlier. She lifted the cardboard box again. Near the reception desk, Officer Daniel Brooks from hospital security watched her leave. He had worked security for nearly 20 years. He trusted instincts more than paperwork. Something about Claire had always seemed different, not dangerous. Disciplined, months earlier, during an active shooter preparedness drill, every employee had panicked except one, Claire. While everyone searched for instructions, she had quietly moved patients away from exposed hallways before the exercise leaders even announced the correct procedure. Afterward, when Daniel asked where she had learned that level of composure, she answered with only 4 words. Old habits stay useful. He never forgot the sentence. This morning, as she walked toward the main entrance carrying nothing except a cardboard box, Daniel felt the same uneasy certainty. People leaving after losing their careers usually look defeated. Claire looked prepared. Outside, dawn slowly brightened the empty parking lot. She stopped beside her aging pickup truck, but did not unlock it immediately. Instead, she looked across the hospital grounds. One black SUV sat motionless beyond the visitor parking area. Its engine was off. Its windows were dark. She had never seen it before. After several quiet seconds, she climbed into her truck and drove away without another glance. Behind the tinted glass of the SUV, a man lifted a photograph. It showed Claire Morgan in the same hospital corridor, taken from a distance only 2 days earlier. He compared the image to the departing truck. Then he spoke into a secure radio. Visual confirmation. A brief pause followed. Then a calm voice answered. "Do not engage. Maintain surveillance. We finally found her." Claire drove without turning on the radio. The city was only beginning to wake. Delivery trucks rolled through empty intersections. A bakery opened its doors to the first customers. Morning light spread across the streets, soft and ordinary. In the rear-view mirror, the same black SUV remained 3 vehicles behind. It never moved closer. It never fell farther back. At the 3rd intersection, Claire turned unexpectedly into a neighborhood lined with small houses. The SUV continued straight. She watched it disappear before calmly returning to the main road. Satisfied, she drove to a modest apartment building on the edge of town. Inside, her home reflected the same discipline she carried at work. Nothing was out of place. Medical textbooks occupied one shelf. A pair of worn hiking boots rested neatly beside the front door. There were no military photographs, no medals, no framed certificates. Nothing that explained the quiet confidence people often noticed. She placed the cardboard box on the kitchen table. The hospital ID badge lay on top. She looked at it for a long moment before placing it inside a drawer and closing it without hesitation. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Emma, the young ER nurse. "Patient from Trauma 3 is stable. Thought you should know." Claire allowed herself a faint smile. She typed only 2 words. "Good work." Nothing more. Back at St. Anne's Medical Center, the morning shift had begun. The emergency department looked normal again, but the mood felt different. Claire's absence was more noticeable than anyone expected. Officer Daniel Brooks sat in the security office, reviewing overnight camera footage. Something caught his attention. At 3:42 a.m., a maintenance worker appeared in Corridor C. Daniel frowned. He knew every maintenance employee by face. He had never seen this man before. The uniform looked correct. The identification badge looked authentic, but the man never carried tools. Instead, he paused beneath a ceiling camera, looked directly into its lens for less than a second, then continued walking. Exactly 20 seconds later, that camera lost signal. Daniel replayed the footage. Again and again, his uneasiness grew. At 9:15 a.m., 2 well-dressed men entered the hospital lobby. They introduced themselves as representatives from a federal contracting office. Their identification appeared genuine. Their questions were polite. "We're looking for Claire Morgan." The receptionist answered without suspicion. She doesn't work here anymore. When did she leave? This morning. Did she mention where she was going? No. The taller visitor thanked her with a professional smile. Neither man asked about payroll records. Neither requested forwarding information. Instead, they slowly walked through the emergency department, observing exits, stairwells, and security stations more carefully than patients or medical equipment. Daniel noticed immediately. He approached them. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" One produced identification again. "We're following up on an employment matter." Daniel studied the badge only briefly. Everything appeared legitimate, yet something felt wrong. Real investigators usually focus on paperwork. These men were studying the building. When they left, Daniel quietly noted the license plate of their vehicle. That afternoon, the hospital's network failed for 38 seconds. Patient records remained accessible. Medical equipment continued functioning. Only the internal security cameras lost connection. The IT department blamed a temporary software fault. Daniel was not convinced. Across town, Claire stood inside a small grocery store comparing prices on a shelf of canned soup. Her life had become unexpectedly quiet. For the first time in years, she had nowhere she needed to be. As she reached for a can, she noticed a reflection in the freezer glass. A man stood near the entrance, pretending to examine a magazine rack. He wasn't reading. He was watching. Without turning her head, Claire continued shopping exactly as before. She paid for her groceries, walked outside, loaded the bags into her truck. The man never approached. He simply watched until she drove away. That evening, Daniel finally received a response about the vehicle registration he had quietly requested through an old law enforcement contact. The license plate did not exist. Not stolen, not expired. It simply wasn't registered. He leaned back slowly. Professional false plates. His concern deepened. A few minutes later, another security officer entered the office. "Daniel, we got 2 more visitors asking about the former nurse." "Same people?" "No. What did they want?" "They only asked where she lived." Daniel's expression hardened. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing." "Good." He walked to the window overlooking the hospital entrance. 2 dark SUVs waited across the street. Neither driver exited. Neither vehicle left. They simply remained parked, watching. Daniel had spent years working hospital security. Before that, he had served 8 years as a military police officer. He knew surveillance when he saw it. This wasn't the curiosity of reporters. It wasn't routine law enforcement. It wasn't debt collectors. Someone had organized a professional search. And for reasons nobody inside the hospital understood, their only interest was a fired emergency room nurse. Daniel quietly locked the security office door. He picked up the phone. After a brief hesitation, he dialed the only personal number Claire had ever given him. The call rang once, twice, then connected. "Claire, it's Daniel." There was a pause. "I think someone is looking for you." On the other end of the line, Claire remained silent for several seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. "I know." Daniel's grip tightened around the receiver. "You know who they are." Another pause. Then came the answer that made the room suddenly feel much smaller. "No, but I know how they work." Claire stood beside the kitchen window, looking across the apartment parking lot. Nothing moved except the delivery van pulling away from the curb. Daniel waited for an explanation. It never came. Instead, Claire asked a question. "Have they entered the hospital again?" "Yes." "How many?" "I've seen at least 4. Maybe more. They're dressed like investigators. Some are. Others look like contractors." Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment. Daniel listened carefully. "I'm listening. Do not confront them. They're inside my hospital." "I know. I can't just ignore this." "I'm not asking you to ignore it." "What are you asking?" She answered in the same calm voice she had used for years inside the emergency room. "Watch." The single word carried unusual weight. Watch where they stand. Watch what they don't look at. People who are searching for someone always ignore everything unrelated to their objective. Daniel frowned. "You've seen this before." Claire did not answer. Instead, she said quietly, "If anything changes, Call me immediately. The line disconnected. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. He had spoken to detectives, soldiers, and police officers during his career. Very few people remained that calm when they believed they were being hunted. 3 hours later, St. Anne's Medical Center returned to its usual rhythm. Doctors moved between treatment rooms. Children waited with worried parents. Stretchers rolled through the emergency entrance. Outside, heavy rain began falling across the city. At 2:17 p.m., 3 identical black SUVs entered the hospital parking garage. They parked on separate levels. None of the occupants spoke as they stepped out. Each carried a small communication earpiece. Each wore ordinary business clothing. Nothing about them attracted attention. Inside the hospital lobby, they separated naturally. One walked toward outpatient imaging. Another entered the cafeteria. The third stopped near the reception desk. To everyone watching, they appeared unrelated. Only their timing connected them. Daniel observed the camera feeds from the security office. Every instinct told him something was about to happen. He noticed a familiar pattern. No one entered through the ambulance bay. No one visited patient rooms. No one asked for medical assistance. Instead, every visitor slowly positioned himself near major corridors, elevators, and exits, not blocking them, measuring them. Daniel quietly picked up his radio. Control to all security officers. Increase visible patrols. No emergency. Just stay alert. At exactly 2:31 p.m., every security monitor went black. The room became silent. 1 second. 2, 3. Daniel immediately checked the backup power indicators. Everything remained operational. Electricity had not failed. Someone had interrupted only the surveillance system. His emergency phone rang. Security. The IT supervisor answered first. We've lost camera access across the building. Working on it? Already trying. Daniel didn't wait for more information. He left the security office at a brisk walk, never running. Running spreads panic. Meanwhile, Claire sat alone in a neighborhood coffee shop. Her untouched cup had grown cold. She had chosen the seat facing the entrance, not because she expected trouble, because she preferred seeing everyone who entered. Her phone vibrated once. Daniel. Cameras down. Entire hospital. Claire stared at the message. Then she immediately stood. She didn't finish the coffee. She didn't hesitate. She walked directly to her truck. Back inside St. Anne's, the first real sign appeared. The main entrance doors briefly locked, then unlocked, then locked again. Staff members exchanged confused looks. It must be another system problem. A receptionist laughed nervously. No one believed it. Several elevators stopped responding simultaneously. Patients were asked to use stairwells. A doctor complained about network delays. Nurses found their internal phones disconnecting after only a few seconds. Individually, none of the failures seemed alarming. Together, they formed a pattern. One Daniel recognized immediately. Communication, movement, observation. Someone was reducing all three. He reached the emergency entrance just as one of the suited visitors stepped inside from rain. The man smiled politely. Busy day? Daniel returned the smile. Always. The visitor nodded and continued walking. Daniel watched carefully. The man never looked at the waiting room, never looked at patients, never looked toward registration. Instead, his eyes paused briefly on every emergency exit, then every stairwell, then every security officer. Professional assessment. Nothing more, nothing less. Claire's pickup truck entered the hospital parking lot 6 minutes later. She did not drive toward the main entrance. Instead, she stopped across the street. From there, the hospital remained fully visible. Rain streaked across the windshield. She counted. 1 SUV, 2, 3. A fourth arrived 30 seconds later. That was enough. She quietly opened a small notebook from the glove compartment. Inside were blank pages. Nothing else. She wrote only 4 words. For vehicles, coordinated arrival. She closed the notebook, then looked at the hospital again. The automatic entrance doors opened. 5 more unfamiliar individuals entered separately. 2 disciplined to be coincidence. 2 organized to be ordinary investigators. Claire reached for her phone. Instead of calling the police, she called Daniel. He answered immediately. They're inside. I know. Claire, who are these people? She looked at the entrance as another SUV rolled silently into the parking structure. Her voice remained steady. I don't know who they work for, but I know what they're preparing. Daniel waited. Claire spoke only one sentence. They're about to seal the hospital. Rain continued to fall across the hospital grounds. Claire remained inside her truck, parked across the street. She watched every entrance without moving. Years had taught her that the first minutes before a crisis always revealed the most. People carrying out surveillance eventually became impatient. Professionals never did. Her phone rang. Daniel, they've stopped pretending. What happened? They're asking security officers to stay away from the East Corridor. They showed federal credentials. Did you verify them? I tried. And they refused. Claire looked toward the emergency entrance. Their controlling movement. Yes. Listen carefully, Daniel. I'm listening. Don't challenge them. You've already said that. I'm saying it again because it's important. Daniel lowered his voice. Claire, patients are inside. I know. If they're dangerous, they won't start with violence. Daniel frowned. How can you be sure? Because professionals don't create chaos until they control it. A long silence followed. Finally, Daniel asked, What should I do? Claire answered immediately. Walk the building. That's all. Count every exit that's still open. Notice which hallways suddenly become empty. Watch who seems too calm. Daniel memorized every word before ending the call. He still had no idea why a fired ER nurse understood the situation better than anyone else. Inside the hospital, afternoon activity continued. Patients filled the waiting room. Children cried. Doctors moved between examination rooms. To most people, it looked like another ordinary day. Only a few noticed the subtle changes. 2 elevators had quietly been taken out of service. A maintenance cart blocked one secondary corridor. A temporary sign redirected visitors away from the East Wing. Everything appeared routine. Nothing actually was. Daniel walked slowly through each floor. He counted security officers. He counted exits. Then he noticed something strange. Every unfamiliar visitor seemed to know exactly where the hospital's blind spots were. No one hesitated. No one looked lost. No one asked for directions. That wasn't normal. Across the street, Claire finally left her truck. She crossed the road carrying nothing except a small backpack. No one stopped her. She entered through the public entrance like any visitor. The receptionist looked surprised. I thought you'd already left. Claire smiled politely. I forgot something. The receptionist nodded. No further questions. Claire walked deeper into the hospital. She wasn't looking for people. She was studying the building. Her eyes briefly moved across fire alarms. Emergency lighting. Exit signs. Security cameras. Oxygen shutoff valves. Trauma supply rooms. Nothing escaped her attention. A passing nurse smiled. Claire, good to see you. You too. No one realized she was silently mapping evacuation routes inside her head. Near pediatric observation, a young mother struggled to calm her frightened son. The child had become separated from his father during diagnostic testing. Claire knelt beside him. Your dad knows exactly where you are. The boy looked up. You promise? I do. Her calm voice steadied him immediately. She stayed only long enough for the pediatric nurse to arrive. Then she quietly continued walking. Daniel watched the interaction from across the corridor. Even under pressure, Claire always reduced fear instead of increasing it. At the opposite end of the building, one of the unknown men observed Claire for the first time. He touched the earpiece hidden beneath his collar. Possible visual. A calm voice answered. Confirm. Female, mid-40s. Former hospital staff. The response came instantly. Maintain observation. No contact. The man obeyed. He didn't approach. He simply watched. Claire never looked toward him, but she already knew he was there. His shoes were polished despite the rain. His posture never relaxed. His eyes scanned reflections instead of faces. Years ago, she had been taught exactly what those habits meant. Daniel met her beside a supply hallway. You came back. I wasn't far. I've counted 9. 9 what? People who don't belong here. Claire nodded. I counted 11. Daniel stared. You found 2 more? They're rotating positions. You can tell. They're covering each other. Daniel looked over his shoulder. To him, the hospital still appeared normal. To Claire, every movement fit into a larger pattern. They're not searching randomly anymore, she said quietly. They already know I'm here. Daniel's expression tightened. Then we need police. Not yet. Why? Because we still don't know who we're calling them against. Before Daniel could answer, an overhead announcement interrupted the hallway. Attention, due to a temporary security concern. Several entrances will remain closed until further notice. We apologize for the inconvenience. Visitors looked confused. Doctors exchanged uncertain glances. Within seconds, magnetic locks secured 3 exterior doors. One, then another, then another. Claire slowly looked toward the ceiling. It begins. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. What do we do now? Claire adjusted the strap of her backpack. Her face remained calm. We protect the patients. And after that, for the first time since returning to the hospital, her eyes hardened. Then we find out who came looking for me. The announcement ended. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Doctors continued writing notes. Nurses pushed medication carts through the corridors. Visitors glanced toward the locked entrance doors, assuming the problem would be resolved within minutes. Claire knew better. Professional operations relied on one thing above all else: normal behavior. If people believed everything was under control, they remained predictable. Daniel stepped beside her. The west entrance just locked too. Claire nodded. How many exits are left? Only the ambulance bay. They'll close that last. Why? Because they need people to believe they still have a way out. Daniel looked at her. You sound like you've studied this. Claire didn't answer. Instead, she started walking toward the emergency department. Daniel followed. You still haven't told me who these people are. I can't. Or you won't. Claire slowed for a moment. I don't know who they work for, but I recognize the methods. That was the closest thing to an explanation Daniel had received all day. Inside the ER, a trauma alert suddenly echoed through speakers. Incoming trauma. 3 minutes. Every available nurse moved immediately. Habit took over. Claire instinctively reached for a pair of gloves before stopping herself. She no longer worked there. Emma noticed. You can still help. Claire looked at the charge nurse. The charge nurse gave a single nod. 1 patient. No paperwork. Claire quietly put the gloves on. The ambulance doors burst open. A construction worker was wheeled inside after falling from scaffolding. Blood covered the left side of his shirt. Panic spread among his family following close behind. Claire ignored the shouting. Her attention stayed on the patient. She checked the airway, breathing, pulse, pupils. Everything happened in seconds. Pressure is dropping. Prepare blood. The attending physician looked toward her. He didn't question the instruction. He trusted it. Emma noticed something unusual. Claire never looked rushed. Even while issuing rapid decisions, her breathing remained steady. Her hands never shook. She didn't simply know emergency medicine. She behaved as though chaos was familiar territory. The bleeding was controlled. The patient stabilized. As the team transferred him towards surgery, the physician quietly spoke to Claire. You should still be here. She smiled faintly. That's no longer my decision. She removed her gloves and stepped away. No applause. No recognition. Just another patient kept alive. Daniel watched from across the trauma bay. He remembered another night 6 years earlier. A bus accident. 37 casualties. Every treatment room overwhelmed. While experienced staff struggled to organize resources, Claire had calmly divided patients by urgency before anyone instructed her to do so. Later, one of the paramedics had asked where she learned battlefield-style triage. She answered with the same sentence. Old habits. Nothing more. At the time, Daniel assumed she meant years in emergency medicine. Now, he wasn't so sure. Across the corridor, one of the unknown men observed through the glass. He watched Claire's movements carefully. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Every action efficient. He quietly pressed his earpiece. Positive identification. The reply came immediately. Confidence. 95%. A pause. Then a new order. Continue observation. Do not engage until confirmation from command. The man lowered his hand. His expression changed. For the first time that day, he looked uneasy. Claire left the trauma bay and washed her hands. Cold water ran over old scars across her knuckles. For a brief moment, memories surfaced. Not vivid images. Fragments. Rain. Rotor blades. Dust. A young soldier struggling to breathe. A tourniquet tightened beneath red emergency lighting. Someone shouting for another medic. Then, silence. She turned off the water. The memories disappeared as quickly as they came. Emma entered the room. I've always wanted to ask you something. Claire smiled. You probably shouldn't. Were you military? The question lingered between them. Claire dried her hands carefully. A long time ago. Emma's eyes widened. So it's true. I was a medic. Army. Claire picked up a paper towel and dropped it into the trash. I helped people who were hurt. Emma waited for more. Nothing came. No stories. No medals. No pride. Only silence. A loud electronic click echoed through the hallway. Another security door locked automatically. Daniel looked toward the monitor above the nurse's station. The internal map showed multiple sections of the hospital changing to restricted access. One after another. Someone was controlling the building remotely. Claire followed the display, without speaking. She counted every locked corridor in her head. East Wing, imaging, administration, surgical access. Only a few unrestricted paths remained. Exactly enough to guide people where someone wanted them to go. Daniel stepped closer. What are they doing? Claire answered quietly. They're shaping movement. So everyone ends up. She finished his sentence. Exactly where they're expecting. At that same moment, a calm voice came through a hidden earpiece worn by the team leader on the hospital's second floor. Target confirmed. Phase 2 begins now. The words reached every member of the team at the same time. Phase 2 begins now. No one acknowledged the order aloud. They simply moved. One left the cafeteria. Another stepped away from the imaging department. Two more exited a maintenance corridor. Each changed position with quiet precision, avoiding panic and staying unnoticed by patients and staff. Only Claire saw the pattern forming. She turned to Daniel. They've stopped searching. His face tightened. What does that mean? They've already found me. Daniel instinctively looked around the emergency department. We need to get you out. Claire shook her head. If I leave now, they'll follow. That's exactly why you should go. No, they came here for one person. If that person runs, this hospital becomes a battlefield. Daniel stared at her. You'd stay? There are 300 people inside this building. My decision affects every one of them. There was no hesitation in her voice, only quiet certainty. Meanwhile, on the second floor, the team leader stood inside an unused consultation room. A tablet displayed a digital floor plan of the hospital. Small blue markers represented as operators. One red marker identified the target. Claire Morgan. A man entered the room. Positive visual confirmation. The leader nodded. No mistakes. None. He enlarged Claire's personnel file. The first page listed only civilian information. Registered nurse. Emergency department. 14 years. Employment terminated today. He swiped to the next page. The screen requested higher authorization. Access granted. A classified record appeared. Combat medic. Decorated for valor. Multiple overseas deployments. Most of the remaining information had been permanently redacted. The younger operator frowned. That's all. The leader quietly replied. No, that's all we're allowed to read. Back in ER, Emma noticed Claire watching every hallway. You look worried. I'm thinking about leaving? Claire looked toward the pediatric wing. No, about keeping everyone here alive. Emma laughed softly, assuming it was another calm joke. Claire never corrected her. Daniel approached again. I called local police. What happened? They said federal personnel are already handling a security matter. Claire closed her eyes briefly. I was afraid of that. They wouldn't even send a patrol car. They believe everything they're being told. So who do we trust? Claire answered without looking away from the corridor. The people protecting patients. A loud crash echoed from the outpatient entrance. Several visitors turned in alarm. A rolling supply cart had fallen onto the floor. Nothing more. Yet while everyone's attention shifted toward the noise, two operators quietly crossed an otherwise crowded hallway unnoticed. Claire caught the movement immediately. Distraction? Daniel followed her gaze. I almost missed them. That was the idea. The hospital intercom sounded again. Attention, due to an ongoing security investigation. Please remain inside your current apartment until further notice. Patients exchanged nervous looks. Doctors began asking questions. No clear answers came. The atmosphere changed. Fear spread slowly instead of all at once. Exactly as planned. Daniel lowered his voice. They're tightening control. Claire nodded, and they're avoiding violence. So maybe this ends peacefully. She looked directly at him. It only stays peaceful if they get what they came for. Daniel understood immediately. You. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Near the ambulance bay. The team leader finally left the consultation room. He walked calmly through the corridor until he stopped beside a large window overlooking the emergency entrance. Another operator joined him. Vehicles are in position. Perimeter? Secure. No civilians aware. The leader watched nurses rushing between ambulances outside. She still hasn't tried to escape. No. Interesting. The younger operator asked carefully, Do we move now? The leader shook his head. Not yet. Why? He kept his eyes on the emergency department. Because Claire Morgan has survived situations far worse than this. If she believes we're rushing, she'll know we're afraid. Claire stood quietly beside a supply cabinet. She opened her backpack. Inside were only ordinary items. A flashlight, a notebook, bottled water, basic medical gloves. Nothing resembling a weapon. Daniel looked inside. That's all you brought? It's enough. For what? She closed the zipper. For helping people. Daniel wanted to ask another question. Before he could speak, Claire noticed something to the glass entrance doors. 3 ambulances had just arrived. None carried patients. All 3 stopped side by side, without unloading anyone. Their emergency lights remained off. Daniel followed her gaze. Those aren't responding to emergencies. No, they're blocking the ambulance entrance. For the first time that day, Claire's calm expression hardened into unmistakable concern. She spoke so quietly that only Daniel heard. They just sealed the last exit. The ambulance entrance was gone. 3 parked ambulances now formed a solid barrier across the only remaining unrestricted exit. To everyone outside, they looked like ordinary emergency vehicles waiting for instructions. To Claire, they were something else. A controlled barricade. Daniel stared through the glass doors. They planned every step. Yes, they've trapped us. Claire shook her head. No, they've trapped themselves with 300 civilians. Daniel looked at her. You still think they'll avoid violence? They'll avoid it as long as they can. And if they can't, Claire answered quietly, then we make sure innocent people are never part of the decision. She turned toward the nurse's station. Emma was helping an elderly patient complete discharge paperwork. 2 pediatric nurses were preparing medication. A surgeon hurried toward the operating suites. None of them understood what was happening. Claire walked over. Emma, she looked up. Can you do me a favor? Of course. I want every patient who can safely move relocated away from the main corridors. Emma blinked. Why? Tell them maintenance is inspecting the ventilation system. That's not true. Claire held her gaze. No, but panic helps no one. Emma hesitated only a moment before nodding. I'll do it. Within minutes, nurses quietly began moving patients into treatment rooms, family consultation areas, and interior wards. No alarms, no shouting, just calm instructions delivered with reassuring smiles. Visitors assumed it was routine, exactly as Claire intended. Daniel watched the changes. You've already started an evacuation. Non-evacuation. What is it? A redistribution. So there are fewer people in open spaces. Claire nodded. If something happens, crowded hallways become dangerous. Daniel realized she had reorganized half the emergency department without giving a single direct order. People simply trusted her. On the second floor, the team leader noticed movement to the security feed his operators had restored for their own use. Nurses are relocating patients. One operator frowned. Coincidence. The leader watched for several silent seconds. No, she's reducing civilian exposure. So she knows. She always knew. For the first time since entering the hospital, genuine respect crossed his face. Claire walked into the pediatric wing. A little girl sat alone coloring with blue crayons while waiting for imaging results. She looked up. Are we in trouble? Claire pulled a chair beside her. Some adults are solving a problem. Will they be loud? I'll do everything I can to make sure they aren't. The girl smiled. I believe you. Claire smiled back. So do I. She stood and quietly continued down the hallway. Daniel had watched the exchange from a distance. He finally understood why every frightened patient relaxed around her. She never offered false certainty, only calm. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Backup generators activated automatically. Medical equipment continued running, but several electronic door systems reset. Throughout the hospital, heavy magnetic locks released for 3 seconds before securing again. Just enough time. 3 operators passed through restricted doors simultaneously. Daniel saw one of them disappear toward intensive care. They're moving. Claire nodded. Phase 3. You know their phases? I know how disciplined teams operate. She immediately changed direction, not toward the operators, toward intensive care. Daniel followed. Why there? They're not interested in patients. Then why go? Because they're expecting me not to. Inside intensive care, everything remained peaceful. Machines hummed steadily. Families sat beside sleeping relatives. Claire entered slowly. Nothing appeared unusual. Then she noticed it. One oxygen cylinder had been moved, only half a meter. Most people would never have seen it. Claire stopped. Daniel whispered, What is it? She pointed. That cylinder blocks the emergency fire cabinet. Daniel frowned. So, it wasn't an accident. He looked closer. The cabinet could still be opened, but not quickly. Someone had delayed emergency access by only a few seconds. A tiny change. A professional change. Claire carefully moved the cylinder back into its proper position. No one around them even noticed. As they left intensive care, Daniel asked, Why would they do that? They're testing me. Testing? They wanted to know if I'd notice. And you did. Claire gave a slight nod. Now they know I'm exactly who they were looking for. At that same moment, the team leader received a quiet radio update. She corrected the obstruction. He closed his eyes briefly. Confirmation complete. No doubt remains. Another operator asked, Orders. The leader answered without emotion. Prepare contact. No weapons unless absolutely necessary. Hospital safety remains priority. The younger man looked surprised. You still care about the civilians? The leader's reply was immediate. We came for one person. No one else. Back in the emergency department. Claire looked through the large glass entrance toward the rain-covered parking lot. She finally spoke the thought she had kept to herself all day. They don't want revenge. Daniel looked at her. They want something only I can give them. And what is that? Claire's eyes remained fixed on the entrance as the automatic doors slowly opened. A single man in a dark suit stepped inside alone. He wasn't hiding anymore. He walked calmly toward her, then stopped a few feet away. Without raising his voice, he said, Corporal Claire Morgan, It's time we talked. The emergency department seemed to grow quieter. Doctors continued treating patients only a few meters away, unaware that the conversation about to begin had been years in the making. The man removed his rain-soaked gloves. He kept both hands where Claire could see them. No sudden movement, no threat. Daniel instinctively stepped forward. The man looked at him politely. "I'm not here for anyone except Ms. Morgan." Claire spoke before Daniel could respond. "It's all right." Daniel looked at her in disbelief. "You know him?" Claire studied the man's face. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, she answered, "No, but I know where he learned to stand." The man's expression changed slightly. "You noticed. You exposed your right side of the hallway. You expected an attack from the left." He gave a faint nod. "Old habit." Claire replied quietly, "Yes." For the first time, the man smiled, not with satisfaction, with recognition. "You really are the same person." Daniel looked between them, unable to follow the conversation. "What is this?" The visitor reached slowly into his jacket. Daniel immediately tensed. Instead of a weapon, the man produced a sealed government identification wallet and placed it on the nearby counter. Claire looked at it without touching it. "You could have shown that this morning. We weren't certain. And now we are." Daniel picked up the identification. It carried federal authorization far above anything he had seen during his years in hospital security. He looked back at the visitor. "So this is official?" The man answered carefully. "Official enough." Claire finally asked a question that had remained unanswered all day. "Why me?" The visitor's face became serious. 8 years ago, during Operation Black Ridge, you treated 6 wounded personnel after an extraction went wrong. Claire remained silent. "You were the only surviving medic." "I remember. The official report disappeared." "I know." The man nodded. "So, did the evidence?" Daniel frowned. "What evidence?" The visitor continued. "Someone inside that operation deliberately ordered civilians into an active combat zone. The incident was covered up. For years, nobody could prove it." Claire's voice stayed calm. "And now, we found the missing records. They confirm everything you reported." Daniel slowly realized what he was hearing. "So you came here because—" The visitor finished the sentence. "She's our final witness." Claire looked directly into his eyes. "If that's true, why surround a hospital?" The man did not avoid the question. "Because another team was coming." Claire understood immediately. "They wanted me dead." "Yes. We reached you first." Silence settled between them. Every strange event from the past day suddenly fit together. The surveillance, the false investigators, the locked entrances, the careful movements. Neither side had been trying to frighten the hospital. Both had been trying to reach one woman before the other could. Daniel let out a slow breath. "So this was never about the hospital?" Claire answered quietly. "No, it only became about the hospital because I was here." The visitor looked toward the waiting room, where families still sat without knowing how close they had come to danger. "You protected them before you protected yourself." Claire gave a small shrug. "I was still their nurse." The visitor lowered his head for a moment. "When I was deployed overseas, people in my unit used to talk about a combat medic who refused evacuation until every casualty was loaded first. I never believed the story." Claire looked away. Stories usually improve with age. "They also said she received a decoration she never spoke about." Claire remained silent. He smiled faintly. "I believe that part now." Outside, police vehicles quietly entered the parking lot, not with sirens, not with flashing lights. The rival team had already withdrawn after realizing they had lost the race. The visitor picked up his identification. "We'll take your statement." Claire looked around the emergency department. Emma was comforting a frightened child. Doctors continued treating patients. Orderlies pushed stretchers through the corridor. Life had already returned to normal. She looked back at the visitor. "Give me 10 minutes. I still have patients to check on." The visitor nodded once. "I expected nothing less." 10 minutes became nearly an hour. Claire moved through the emergency department one final time. She checked on the construction worker, who had arrived earlier that afternoon. His surgery had gone well. He was awake, tired but stable. She stopped outside the pediatric room. The little girl with the blue crayons looked up and smiled. "Everything okay now?" Claire smiled back. "Yes." The girl held up her drawing. "I made this for you." It showed a nurse standing beside a hospital bed beneath a bright sunrise. No medals, no uniforms, just a nurse. Claire folded the picture carefully and slipped it into her backpack. "Thank you." As she stepped into the hallway, Emma caught up with her. "I knew there was something different about you." Claire gave a small smile. "We all have a past." Emma hesitated. "Were you really a combat medic?" Claire looked toward the busy nurses' station. "A long time ago. You saved all of us today." Claire shook her head gently. "No, we all did our jobs." Before Emma could say anything else, Claire quietly walked away. At the main entrance, Daniel was waiting. The rain had finally stopped. Federal vehicles stood outside without attracting attention. Most patients assumed they belonged to another routine investigation. Daniel extended his hand. Claire shook it. "I don't suppose I'll see you working here again." She smiled. "I don't think so." He looked at her for a long moment. "I spent all day trying to figure out who you were." And Daniel smiled faintly. "I think I was asking the wrong question." Claire tilted her head. "The right question wasn't who you were. It was why someone like you chose to become an ER nurse." For the first time that day, Claire paused before answering, because after enough years treating people in war, helping people in peace feels like a privilege. Daniel said nothing. There was nothing to add. A black government sedan pulled quietly to the curb. The same federal officer stepped out and opened the rear door. No reporters waited outside. No television cameras. No crowd gathered to applaud. Inside the hospital, the night shift had already begun. Patients still needed treatment. New ambulances continued arriving. Life moved forward. Claire looked once more at the emergency department entrance. Then she climbed into the sedan. As it disappeared into the evening traffic, only a few people watched it leave. Most never learned why strangers had searched for a fired ER nurse. The hospital records will remember Claire Morgan as an employee whose final shift ended with a termination notice. Nothing in those files would mention the decorated combat medic who quietly protected an entire hospital without seeking recognition, and that was exactly how she wanted it.